Hi everyone. In this video we're going to solve problem F on page 52. So the directions again are asking us to use the Pythagorean identities to simplify. Remember that simplify just means we want to get as few terms as possible in our answer, and we probably don't want to have any fractions. And the Pythagorean identities are on page 51, right here. So we're going to use these three Pythagorean identities in order to simplify problem F. So let's go ahead and turn over the page, so I'm going to run out of room if I don't. So on F we have tangent squared over secant x plus 1 plus 1. So the first thing we notice is that nothing cancels out right now, or nothing simplifies, because all of our terms are different. So let's go ahead and redefine something so that we can simplify this. The easiest way to do this is going to be look at tangent squared, and using our identity, replace tangent squared. So notice that we have 1 plus tangent squared equals secant squared. So if we want to know what tangent squared equals, so we can replace it, we want to get tangent squared by itself in our identity. To do that, we can subtract 1 to both sides. So let's go ahead and do that and see what we get. So I'll just go ahead and rewrite the equation. We have 1 plus tangent squared equals secant squared. Okay, so now we want to subtract 1 to both sides to get tangent squared by itself. So minus 1, minus 1. 1 minus 1 is 0, so 1 cancels out here. We can bring down tangent. So we're left with tangent squared equals secant squared minus 1. Okay, so that tells us that tangent squared is actually equal to secant squared minus 1. So we can replace tangent squared in our problem with secant squared minus 1, since tangent squared equals secant squared minus 1. So we can rewrite our problem as secant squared minus 1 divided by secant plus 1. Just bring everything else down now. Plus 1. Okay, so notice that still nothing cancels out or nothing simplifies yet. So we still want to do something here so that we can cancel or simplify our fraction. Notice that secant squared minus 1 looks kind of like x squared minus 1 if we just replaced secant with x. When we have a squared variable minus a perfect square, we can actually factor it out using our Punnett square. So let's go ahead and factor secant squared minus 1 using our Punnett square. So again, the first term goes in the first square. So secant squared goes here. And then we just go down on the diagonal. Our next term, minus 1, goes in the next square. Notice we don't have a middle term this time. That means our middle term is 0. Okay, so what two numbers multiply to get secant squared? Well, just like when we have x squared, we would put x and x. To get secant squared, we get secant times secant. Since secant times secant is x secant squared. To get 1, we would use 1 times 1. But since 1 is negative, one of our 1's have to be negative. So we have positive 1 times negative 1, since positive 1 times negative 1 is negative 1. Okay, now let's see if it works. So 1 times secant is just positive secant. Secant times negative 1 is negative secant. And negative secant plus positive secant will give us, by the additive inverse, 0, which is our middle term. So it works. That tells us that our factors for secant squared minus 1 are secant plus 1 and secant minus 1, which just means that secant minus 1 times secant plus 1 gives us secant squared minus 1. So we can replace secant squared minus 1 with our two factors. In other words, we can rewrite our equation as secant minus 1 times secant plus 1. Again, that's because secant minus 1 times secant plus 1 gives us secant squared minus 1. We just factored it. So I'm just going to rewrite that as this. And now we're going to divide by secant plus 1. And bring down our plus 1. Now does anything simplify or cancel out? Well, we have secant x plus 1 in the numerator, or the top of the fraction, and we've secant x plus 1 in the denominator, or the bottom of the fraction. Secant x plus 1 divided by secant x plus 1 is just 1, because the same number divided by itself is 1. So those two terms cancel out. And we're left with secant minus 1. Our fraction basically just goes away since our bottom canceled out. And we bring down our plus 1. So we're left with secant minus 1 plus 1. And negative 1 plus 1 is just 0. So that cancels out. And we're left with secant. Perfect. And since secant is just one term, and it's not a fraction, that has to be our answered simplified completely. So that's problem F. And that's it. Thank you for watching, guys.